Greetings and welcome to Creative Briefing, the ad hoc live streaming show that looks at all aspects of creativity and what it means to be creative, whether it's a professional working creative or just someone that likes to be creative for fun. We look at the visual arts, design, art, sketching, music, or the moving arts, video, animation, whatever takes my fancy, whatever I feel like talking about on any particular occasion. And I'm usually flying from the seat of my pants. I'm usually winging it because it's an ad hoc show, right? I just go with the flow. So today I'm gonna look at image compositing. We touched upon this a little bit with the sky replacement. I'm going to expand that beyond sky replacement today to composite an entire image, a whole image made out of component elements. So, you know, whether you're a photographer or a photo illustrator, or whether you're, you know, just someone who has, you know, want to add some, you know, nice images to your portfolio or photo albums. Whether you take your own, you can take your own photographs or all these images I found on Unsplash. So plenty of opportunity and possibility to put these techniques into good use. Can't always find the one great photo that we're looking for to tell our story, or to put on our desktop. Sometimes it's as simple as that. We just want a cool image on our desktop. You can't find that one, but you find a little bit of this image that looks great, and a little bit of that image that looks great, and you want to blend the two together. So we're going to look at that, some more advanced masking and blending techniques, perspective matching, color matching, all that good stuff. So we're in Photoshop. I'm in Creative Cloud CC 18 or 19, I forget. It's not the most recent one. So some of I know that if you're on the most recent version of Creative Cloud, if you just upgrade, just as a matter of course, some of the tools and commands have changed in CC20. So just be aware of that, and I'll try and point them out as far as I recognize them. I don't use CC20 here at home, but I have used it on site in a couple of places where I've worked who have the Creative Cloud. So I will try and point those out, and but overall the technique and the concepts that I am going to be demonstrating here are the same. So let's get into Photoshop, and I'm going to bring up the images that let's see. So open recent, and I have these, so let's see. These are all images that I found on Unsplash. So if you want to search for like road, mountain road, desert road, sunset, those sorts of search terms, I forget the exact terms I searched for, but you should be able to find these images if you wanted to follow on. No, that was one. No, that wasn't it either. As you can see, I went through a few road images. I wish there was an easier way of... There we go. So I've got this lovely sunset over a mountainscape with some trees in the foreground. I have this great mountain road with trees lining it, which is really cool too. But this is the sort of angle and perspective, and that infinite, almost vanishing point meeting the horizon. That is the look I'm going for. The central road going away in a straight line into the distance. The desert either side is kind of cool, but when it's darkened and made sort of that sunsetty look. It doesn't really have that much interest. It all just kind of goes away. So and the mountains at the back are a little bit nondescript. So I want to add I want to exaggerate that, or add to the sense of perspective. I want to add the sunset to make it more dynamic looking, and also add some more interest to the sides, which is where the forest trees will come into play. So first thing I want to do is get obviously all the images into the one image, and to do this I will select all, and just with the move tool just click and drag up onto the tab. If you hold shift and then release, it will place that image centrally on the image that you're dragging it to. So now I've got rid of that, I can close it, don't need it. Let's grab this one, select all. Now if there's an alternative way, let me go to my workspace where I have my palettes. As you can see here, background is the only layer, and background cannot be dragged. So if I deselect it, if I try and drag that, I'll get an error that I can't. Now I can convert it to a normal layer, and then I can drag it and do the same. I have to actually drag it onto the, hold down shift. Obviously if this is a background layer, that's why I select all, then I'm dragging the pixels as opposed to the layer. So I'm going to close that, not save it. Now I have all these, I can save that for later, don't really want to concern myself with that for now. First thing I want to do, I have the road, and this will be my base layer, and we'll just leave that as such. I think just for now I'm going to double click that and call it road, so it's a normal layer. I will call this trees and call this sunset, or I just call it sky for now. Okay, so now let me just go into a little larger screen. Now you can see my cursor. First thing I want to do is mask out the trees. I don't need the mountain in the background, or the road. So all I want to do is really capture elements of the trees. So first thing I'm going to do, we can try the wand tool, but I don't think that's going to work because there's just too many colors. You can see it would be really hard to capture. You're losing a lot, and to go in here and try and capture all the little bits in between the tree branches, that would be difficult. Let's try the quick select tool. If I hit W again, now some of you may have the default preferences set. I prefer to turn off the interface. Where is it? Use Shift Workspace. I can't remember where they've hidden it now, but there is a use Shift to switch between tools. I deselect that the first thing I do whenever I put a new install of Photoshop on. That way I can just toggle between the tools just with one key press. Anyway, so let's go back to the quick selection tool by hitting W again and try and draw around that. And as you can see, it's not very accurate. It's a little imprecise. So the right tool for the right job, this obviously isn't going to work in this case. So my go-to technique for doing this sort of thing is, I can just drag this up a little bit, there we go, is to inspect the channels and see where the contrast is and make a selection channel from one of the regular channels. And so here it looks like blue has the most contrast between the trees in the sky, the trees and the mountains in the back, and there'll be some hand masking. So that has a lot of detail in it. That has a lot of detail in it. This seems to have a lot of solid dark areas. So I'm going to just drag that onto the new channel icon, and that will duplicate the blue channel, and I am going to do a quick image calculations and do blue copy, multiply, and as you can see, that multiplies the blue channel against itself, and I'm going to do that as a new channel and call that good. We can probably delete that channel eventually. I'm going to save it for now. I'm going to start working on this. So I'm going to concern myself with this side of the image real quick, because that's up on screen. I'm going to bring up the levels and then just bring up the whites using the level slider. This, if you're not familiar with the histogram, this shows the color and tonal values of the overall image, and you can see there's a lot of blacks, a lot of dark grays, not many mid grays, a lot of light grays, and not many whites. So what I'm doing is saying this is the lightest area of the image. I want the lightest area of the image, pure white, to be the light gray area. So basically I'm making all of the image lighter so that all the information in this area of the image, in this tonal value of the image, is now pure white, and it drags the midtones, what they call the gamma, down correspondingly. The blacks I'm going to drag up so that likewise it makes the dark grey images to absolute black, and I'm going to mess with the midtones a little bit just to create a bit more contrast without losing too much in the way of blocking out. So that looks pretty good for now. So as you can see, the trees are all mostly black, which is what we want. That's our selection. The road we don't need to concern ourselves with. The mountains are mostly greys, which we can then, it will help us paint those out, and the sky is mostly white. So for now I'm going to hit the O tool, which is the dodge and burn, and I'm going to get onto dodge, and I'm going to select highlights up here. Exposure's about 20%, that's probably a good place to start, and I'm going to bring up the brush a little bit, and just all the little light grey areas in the sky, I'm just going to paint those. It's just burning them out. It's dodging. In the old film processing days, you would put like a little mask under the projector that was exposing the film plate, and you would dodge that so it would get less light exposed on it, so it would be lighter. And burning was the opposite. You would have a piece of cardboard with a hole in it, and you would let more light pass onto one area, so you'd be burning that area in with more light, so it would be essentially it would print and expose darker. So that's where the dodge and burn tools come from historically. Now I'm just going to do the same thing with these mountains. I really only need to concern myself with the edges here. I don't need to worry about all this. That I can just paint out with a paintbrush. So for now I just want to make sure that I get enough contrast between the defining edges. So I can get the brush tool X to make it and just paint all this out as carefully as I can. Let me grab the tablet, and that might be a little easier to do. Just get the large areas, so all I have to concern myself with is just cleaning up these edges. So it's a bit of push and pull, and I might have to shortcut this and do a bit of a crummy job. Let's go back to the dodge and burn tool, and let's zoom in here a little bit and see what we got. Maybe make the exposure a little stronger. Try not to damage the edges of the tree so that you retain the selection. or retain the shape of the mask to be used in the selection. I'm going to toggle back and forth between the brush and the dodge and burn tool. Some of these areas are quite dark. The dodge tool will not really work too well on them. So I'm just going to go quite quickly, and I might have done a more precise job if this was an actual project, but I'm just going to rush through this real quick just so that the lesson doesn't take 14 hours. So I'm leaving a little bit in there. Overall, it probably won't matter too much because these images, these trees are going to be blended in with the larger image. But you know, devil is in the details, and we want to try and do the best job we can. But the dodge and burn tool are great because you can see I can brush over it willy-nilly. I'm not having to be too accurate because the settings are only concerning with the highlights. So almost there. Let's just I want to get some of the gaps in the trees too. So now we want to do the same thing with the blackness of the trees. So I want to, let me bring up the hardness of that. I want to make sure that most of the stuff in the trees isn't too choppy, for want of a better word. Lots of all the small holes are filled up. Obviously some of the holes up here where the sky wants to be shining through, we want to keep those. And I do recommend zooming in as much as you can. Actually, I'm going to switch to the brush and just paint in black from this point forward. Just continuing to just paint out these areas where we want all these trees to be selected. So we're going to get a solid area of black against a solid area of white, and that will be our selection. Switch back to the burn tool. Whoops, that got a little heavy in there. Let me go back and try and burn out a few of these areas. There's lots of little areas between the trees I still want to retain, and I don't want to burn these out too much when I hit the burn tool. I want to darken the blacks, but I don't want to fill in those areas too much. And let me just paint that little bit of smudge out there. Okay, so we have a fairly good selection for our trees. That's good enough for now. Still a bit mucky in there, but I think this will do for now. We get the general idea. And like I say, again, you would be spending a little more time if this was for reals, as they say. So let me just burn out these areas a little bit so that you get a good edge selection on there. I'm not really too concerned about that because that will be, again, hand composited. Right, so there's our main tree selection. I'm going to actually let's just fill this in real quick. Whoops. A bit slap happy there with a big brush. Let's be a bit more accurate. There we go. Because I do not want the road. Just make it easy on myself, make less work to do. Let's not fall into the laziness trap. There we go. That should help. That didn't take a minute. Okay, so we have our selection. I'm going to Command I to invert that. So now our trees are the selection, and I can see a little bit of muck up in there. I'm just going to clean that up a little bit. Now I'm going to Command click. Hold down Command and click the thumbnail. Whoops, click the thumbnail of the alpha channel. And I'm going to call that alpha channel trees, just so I know, even though I can see what it is. Click on the RGB to bring that back. Now I'm going to hit Command J to make that a layer on its own. So I'm going to zoom into here a little bit, and I really just want to concern myself with this left side of the image. So I'm going to make a layer mask real quick. Layer masks are great for erasing stuff. Erasing is permanent, and you can undo, you know, undo until you go back a few steps if you mess up. But I'd rather do the push and pull of painting into a layer mask than erasing. So I'm just going to go in here and clean up this background stuff. I just want it to this section here, and I can mess with that stuff a little bit later. So let's just lasso all this stuff, and right, so now I just have this area. I can also go into here and clean up this road. I'm just going to hold shift and just kind of click to draw a straight line between brush points. It's a lot easier than trying to paint a straight line or a line along a curve. It's often easier just to shift click and get that line you want. So now I can right click on that, apply the layer mask, and I have just these trees on the left. That's all I want for now. Let's turn that off and go back to this trees layer, and there was a portion of tree up here that probably didn't get masked. So let's see if I can, yeah, let's duplicate this layer by dragging it onto here, and I'm going to drag this until that matches up. And I'm going to zoom into here to make sure it does match up. There, so now that mask matches up. So I am going to try and capture this last little bit of tree here by, now what did I do? I multiplied the blue, so I think I will, yeah, just grab this. I'm going to Command C to copy that bit of the blue channel and paste that into there. So, and I'm going to invert it so that it matches my black and white, hit Command L to bring up the levels. I'm going to blow the trees out to pure white, bring the black skies up to pure black, mess with the midtones a bit, and that's pretty good. Very quickly, I'm just going to, oops, let's just clean up some of this mess. Okay, so we've recaptured that last little bit of tree there. I do want to make sure we get as much, because I'm going to be shifting it into place. I want to make sure I have enough tree information on this side. So once again, I'm going to command click on this tree. Going to look at the RGB again, and I'm going to select that layer, command J to make that selection its own layer. I'm going to add its layer mask again, and then go back into here, and then just brush tool, nice small brush tool. Just paint out yeah, let's see which bits are in the, because here's the thing with these trees is the road goes down and then turns. So you have this row of trees going away in perspective, and then you have this sort of trees going away in perspective, and then now you've got the road sort of facing us. Obviously my composite image, I want it to be just going away in perspective, so we're going to sort of do a little trickery and fakery. So obviously all this stuff here we don't want. It's a matter of finding out where the, so I think there's a nice shadow here. I will just go through and use that as my border. And again, this little bit I don't have to be too accurate, because it will be blended in and we won't see too much of this seam on both sides. So again, I'm gonna get my lasso and just fill that in. Let me get there we have this side of the trees and this side of the trees, and we have a little bit of perspective going on. I'm going to call this left. I'm going to apply this layer mask, call this right. Now one more bit of trees I'm going to grab from this. I am going to command click on this layer again, command J. Actually, I'm going to select the marquee. I still have the marquee tool. By holding down option and shift, you can see that the cursor, you can see that? Yeah, you see the cursor changes to the crosshairs with an X. That is the intersection marquee. So if I hold down option and shift and then draw a rectangle around just the background bits, that's saying only select the intersection between this selection and the selection I've just drawn. So now all I want to do is command J that area, and I have like this far horizon, mountains, trees that I want, and I will just draw a rectangle there and delete that very crudely, and I think I'll just tidy up this. And again, I'm just using the eraser this time, contrary to what I just said. I'm just going to be very crude because this is a tiny little element. This will be in the horizon, so I'm just going to sort of click to make it look like this tree. Okay, so that's somewhat believable at that scale. We're only at 25%, so blown up, yes, it might look a little bit crude, but again, once it's blended in, we will be sitting pretty. So let's start compositing. We have our road, and you can see the perspective is not quite right. In fact, it's very, very not right. So I'm going to start with this left element, and I'm going to Command T to transform it, and you can see I've got some junk somewhere, so I'm just going to marquee tool and just delete whatever junk is elsewhere in the that got caught in the selection. There we go. So maybe there's still some junk up there somewhere. Maybe it's up here. Okay, there we go. So I got rid of whatever junk that was there. Now I've got my Command T bounding box is more or less the size of the... And I'm going to plant this at the edge of the document, and you can see round about here where the edge of the road, whoops, edge of the road, because I want the trees to be on the edge of the road there. And I'm going to scale it up just a little, and then I'm going to hold Command and Shift, and that will allow me to drag this up sort of in perspective. I'll drag this down in perspective a little bit. I'm going to have to foreshorten that because it's got a little distorted. I may bring this in a little bit because it got a little distorted. Bring this back down. So I'm pushing and pulling, getting that angle just right. The perspective along the road line, and the tree trunk still to be somewhat vertical, although they might be, with perspective, they may start to fall in a little bit, but I think that is okay. I think I'm going to nudge it down just a little bit, and that's fine for now. Okay, we'll do the same thing on the right. Place that at the edge of the scene. Command T. Now again, we've got some junk up here, so I'm going to bring this down again and marquee tool the top area where there might have been some junk left over. Delete those areas. Command T again. Still some junk over there. So, oops. Oh, I do not like that new move tool feature. I do it all the time. Hit the V key and it's got this page, whatever it is. I don't ever use that tool, and I'm just used to hitting the V key to go back to my move tool and then move something, and then I've inadvertently drawn myself a new page. That is one of the least enjoyable parts of the new Photoshop versions. So I'm going to delete that. Let's see. Alright, so now that's my clean bounding box. Place that at the edge. Again, I'm going to Command Shift and bring out the perspective. I'm going to narrow it to force that perspective a little. Bring that, and then that's actually okay. Bring that up again a bit more. Maybe I'll scale that down and nudge it across. Now, okay, so we can see that this is sort of bowed in the middle. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to warp that and then just bring this up in the middle just a little. Just so that it matches the road a little more. There we go. So now we have our trees on the side of the road. I'll blend this in with the edges a little more. I'm going to try and keep this lesson brief. It's dragging on a little. Now I'm gonna Command J to duplicate that and drag it behind left, and Command T to transform it. I'm gonna hold Shift to scale that down, and I'm gonna put a copy behind it to sort of extend that. And I will do the same thing one more time. Command J, drag it behind, Command T, let's shrink that down, put it behind here. And I can just zoom in a little bit and erase some of that. You can see it's not quite. I'm just gonna reveal the road behind it. Okay, and maybe with this one I'll just erase some of this stuff as well. There. Okay, so it's not perfect, but as I said, it's going to all blend in once we start building the composite. I may do the same thing on the right. I'll Command J that, drag that behind, scale that down really small, and just plonk that in the distance there. Let me experiment a second and see what this looks like without this big tree in the way here. Does it look any more natural? Not really, so let's just go with that. Okay, so I have the trees, and I also have this background one that's like far in the horizon. I'm gonna scale this way down. Whoops. And move this. That's behind all of them. I'm gonna call this horizon. And that's all the way down there. So now we have this road transformed from the desert into a forest mountain road, and we have taken this road lined with trees and basically made it go further into perspective all the way to the horizon where it vanishes. So using the best of both worlds, again, that's what the essence of compositing is, using the best of 2 or 3 images. Now, of course, this is still daytime, and it's got a nice blue-grey sky that don't really want, so I'm going to option click this layer just to make it the only layer visible. If I option click the eyeball, it will toggle between the last viewed state and soloing this layer. If I option click on the trees, I'm soloing that layer, then I can toggle that back. So that's a nice little trick, option clicking the eyeball. So this is a nice flat sky. So if I solo that and use the wand tool. That's got me really where I need to go. Command Shift I to invert that selection, and now I have this road isolated, and I can drag the sky behind it. Now I want the sun to be visible, so I'm going to drag this layer up until the sun is in the horizon, and let me bring these trees up. There we go. Now I've got this lovely road heading towards the sunset. So getting there. So what I want to do now, obviously I've got the composite, I've got my elements built. Now I need to start thinking about the color. What I'm going to do, I'm going to drag trees down to the custom, like my backup. I don't need that in the stack anymore. I'm going to select all my trees, and I'm going to all my tree layers, and I'm going to right click and convert to smart object. Now there's several ways you can do this. You can group them and then add your corrections, or you can group them as a smart object, smart layer, and then go into that document, that pseudo document, and do your corrections there. Now you can't see them in context when you do that, but it's a little tidier, I suppose. So I'll demonstrate both ways here, and it's good to understand how to do both. So with my, I'm going to rename this trees. With my trees layer, it's now a smart layer. So I'm going to double click that, and I am now in this layer, so this pseudo document with all those layers intact. I am going to add a adjustment layer of curves, and I'm going to bring the black, much like the levels, this is saying that I want the document's darkest pixels mapped to, I want pure black mapped to whatever is now at this sort of dark grey, and I want the light to be mapped here. Now I want the dark to be quite dark because this is supposed to be sunset, and we're going to lose a lot of the detail, so I'm going to bring the dark into here, and I'm going to add a bit of an S-curve. I'm also going to bring down the light. So what we're saying is the lightest areas are not going to be pure white. They're going to be a light grey, and by grey, that's let's tidy that up. Delete the layer mask. I find them visually cluttering. You're saying it's not grey as in the color, but grey as in the luminosity values, as in the greys of the individual color channels. So I'm saying I don't want this to be pure brightness, I want it to be somewhat less bright, and that will give us the illusion of like the bright pixels not being quite so bright, or but give it the illusion of dusk. And I'm going to bring a little curve in here to kill the mids, and just add a little S-curve to punch up the brights a little bit. And you can see we're getting some of the little high spots in here. We still have some of the detail in the trees, but essentially it's quite dark. I'm going to bring some of the detail back in the darks because the S-curve has given us that. And again, it's a lot of push and pull and trial and error. It's very rare you're going to get the first click you're going to get right. You're going to go back and forth, and as you add other color corrections, you're going to go back and say, well, that curves is a little bit too strong. So another essential concept about this tutorial and this technique is that we're doing things non-destructively. I have my trees layer still intact, and I have the channel saved for that selection. So if I do have to go back, I can recapture those layers. Now the tree individual layers are individual layers, and the data has been deleted around them, but I can always go back and recreate them if necessary. These color corrections are non-destructive. It's an adjustment layer in a smart object or smart layer, so that I can go back at any time and re-edit those. It's all about non-destructive editing to give yourself, it's about, you know, it's being a guy, you're being non-committal, you know, you're still dating this color correction. You're not willing to marry it just yet. So that's the way I look at it anyway. So anyway, let's get on. I think that's good for now. I'm going to add a hue saturation over that. I'm going to warm it up a little, dragging it a few clicks that way to make it more warm and orange, because the sunset is very red and orange. I want the color in the trees to reflect that. I'm going to pump up the saturation because it's hyper saturated time of day, and well, I probably don't need to bring the darkness down too much because it's already quite dark with the curves. Okay. And again, a bit of housekeeping. I don't know why they add that layer mask there out of default. It's unnecessary. If I want a layer mask, I can easily add one later, but I find it visually cluttering. So let me just, well, that looks okay. I mean, the edge of the road will blend in with the road quite nicely, so I don't need to worry about, again, I didn't do a very good masking job of that, because I knew that it's all going to be black along that area. If under further inspection it needs some softening of these areas on here, then we'll do that. Let's close this. This is a PSB, it's a Photoshop temp file. It's really stored in RAM and within the master document that it's saved with. It isn't really a file anywhere on your desktop. So let's close that and save it, even though it behaves like a file. So now you can see those trees are looking a bit more like they belong in that sunset, starting to come together. So one thing I can see, and again, here's the difference. Now I can't work on this trees layer unless I right click and rasterize it and it's flattened into a layer, but again, we're being non-destructive, so I want this to be editable later. And this area down here isn't really working for me, but we'll address this. Let's get the road color corrected. And I'm going to add an adjustment layer above that. Actually, I'm going to make that a smart object because I know I want to add a filter, some blur filter to this later. So I'll make this a smart object for now, and I will. Let me see. Let me do double click this, go into here, and do the same treatment. Let me add the curves. I'm going to darken this, darken the lights, add a bit of an S curve. And again, I like this road because it's got a lot of grit and gravel in the foreground, and I want to retain that. So I don't want to darken this too much. I want to retain some of this detail, especially in the painted stripes. So I'll make this a little less dark than the trees layer. I'm going to delete that. Let me see. Well, let's take a look and see how that looks. I'm going to add another quick hue saturation over that. Again, just warm it up a tad, bump the sat, and bring down the lightness a little bit. Okay, now again, I'm going to close the PSB, save that, and now it's looking a bit more like a whole, like it all belongs. And you can see this seam along here is starting to go away. But I think what I want to do is go into the trees, and I'm going to, on this layer here, get my dodge tool, my burn tool again, and on the mid-tones with an exposure very low 20, I'm just going to start burning out some of this grass or whatever it is in here. that's sort of caught in the sunlight. It's a little distracting, it's a little over bright for my liking. Just going to knock it back a tad. And I'm going to add a layer mask, and I'm going to bring up a soft brush and just knock this back a little bit so that that seam isn't quite as obvious. This side doesn't seem to matter too much. I'm going to just clean up some of this. There. And let's see how that looks in context. Already that's blending in a little bit more. I'm going to go into the road and I'm going to just burn this edge of the road a little bit. Just the edges here at the side where the trees blend in. I want these to be more along the dark black areas where the tree line blends in. So that wasn't very non-destructive, but I could have duplicated the layer and made the adjustment to that. But there, so this is blending in a little nicer now, and that road is still looking a little bluey green. So I'm going to go back and just adjust this into the yellow oranges a bit more, and bring down the darkness a couple more clicks, and I'm going to do the blues. Just select by selecting which channel I'm working on. By selecting the blues now, you can see down here I'm only working on the blue tones in the image. So I'm going to bring that down, and you can see the top is like the tones we're working on, and the bottom is the colors we're adjusting them to. So I'm going to do that until, okay, now it's more red and orange. So I'm going to do, and you can adjust these if you wanted to, you know, this is the sort of fall off and this is the tones that you're adjusting. I'm going to, yeah, that's all a bit, all right, so let's make that red and orange. Let's call that good for now. Now in context it looks a little better. Okay, I'll accept that for now. Now I can see on the horizon there's some muck in here, and that looks like it's in the trees layer. No, that is on the road layer. Okay, so I need to go and clean up this road mat up in here as we're getting a little bit of muck showing up. Select the brush tool, make it a hard brush, and then let's just clean up some of this stuff that's showing up in the, don't have to be too precise because the tree line really masks all of this. So there we go, that's better. So our image is coming along quite nicely. With these being smart objects, now what I can do is add a blur. So I'm going to do a, now I could do a tilt shift blur, but the problem with that is that I want it to blur the center and leave the outside of the focus ring, and the tilt shift works counter to that. It blurs things around the outside because it's mimicking like an out of focus sort of lens sort of situation, the real sort of blur that happens with a camera lens. Obviously I'm not trying to mimic that, I'm trying to fake depth of field, which is what I'm trying to do here. So the tilt shift is nice and gives us some good controls, but unfortunately it doesn't give us the ability to reverse that. So I'm just going to use a simple Gaussian blur and a layer mask. So yeah, that's a bit strong. Let's go with like 5, somewhere in the 5 region. That looks okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the layer mask here, hit G for the gradient tool, make sure I'm on the radial gradient, and then just click somewhere in the horizon and bring it out to the edge here so that you can see it creates this type of gradient. Now I've got an idea of what the gradient is. That's not working for me. So I'm going to click again in the center and bring it further out so that it's more gray. I'm going to hit levels. It reminds me of Warner Brothers, Looney Tunes, that sort of gradient there. Okay, that looks pretty good. I'm going to Command I to invert that. Now I'm going to have to bring up the levels again because that was too grey on the outside. Okay, let's... There, that's looking okay. Let's see what it looks like in context. And if I hold down Shift and click on that, it will disable it, and you can see that I've got focus in the near trees, and I have blurred in the distance. Now it's a bit strong, so I can go back and reduce the blur. Or I can adjust the layer mask. Okay, so we end up with a gradient that looks somewhat like that. So slightly blurred, and now I'm going to do the same thing to the road. I'm going to filter Gaussian blur, and do that, and then I'm going to option drag this layer mask onto that layer mask and say yes please, and now everything gets slightly blurred as it fades off into the distance. So what else can we do? Alright, there's one last thing I'd like to do. I'm going to select the sky layer. I'm going to hit the marquee, the M key twice to bring up the marquee, and I'm going to hit return to bring up the feather, hit 200, enter. Now I've got a ellipse marquee with a 200 pixel feather, and I'm going to click in the center of the sun area-ish, and then just hold down option, and it will draw from the marquee from the center and bring like a egg oval shaped, maybe about that. Don't want it to be too big, but maybe about that. Okay, and I'm going to hit Command J, and I'm going to bring that above everything, and let's do if I hold down option and hit Gaussian blur, it's going to bring up the, rather than just apply the Gaussian blur, it's going to bring up the options for that, and I'm going to make a rather large blur, about 100 pixels. That should do it. So now we're going to experiment with some blending modes. This is like the haze of the evening light. Obviously it's a bit strong like that, but you can see it's adding something. It's going to add some color to the trees. It's going to add a little bit of haze. So just with the move tool selected, just going shift up or shift plus and shift minus. It's going to toggle through the blending modes till we get one that we like. That was screen, that's not bad. Add, linear dodge, lighter color, no. So overlay and soft light, not really working. They're a little subtle and they make it the distance too dark. Hard light's kind of got a nice haze to it. And I think what we can do is if I hold down shift and then drag that down so it's really on the horizon mark of the road. That's not bad. So let's do shift plus, keep going through a vivid light, linear light, psychedelic, so I think maybe screen, add I did like hard light, and then maybe make it like 20-30%. Yeah, that's not bad. Hard light at 30%. Let's go with that for now. I'm going to rename this layer glow. I will if I can select the layer label. There we go. So one thing, okay, let's do one last thing. Let's I love a vignette. I'm a sucker for a vignette, as I've said before. I'm going to add a curves, and now I do want this layer mask. So let's make this really dark. And okay, with our layer mask, I'm going to hit M again with our 200 pixel. Let's bring this down so I get a bit more of a area, and I'm going to option delete in there, and you can see that it's created a bit of a vignette in the corners. Let's add another marquee, do another 200 pixel from there to there. It's got rounded rectangle shape. Let's take a look at what that looks like. Let's Gaussian blur that a couple of times, and then let's see what this, so that, let's just brighten up those edges a little bit, brighten up the edges of the layer mask a bit so that the color correction shows through. So I've got a nice little vignette on that layer, and I think we are done. Maybe just one more. I always like to add one final curves, which I will call global color, and get rid of that, and then just, whoops, daisies. Not sure if we need that. Let's take a look. This kind of glues the whole thing together. I can reduce the opacity of that so it's not quite as strong. Maybe 40. Okay. And I think that helps, again, eliminate the seams along the edge of the tree line. What we could do, one last thing we could do if we wanted to, would be to duplicate this layer. Call that trees blurred. I'm going to rasterize it, move it behind the trees. going to blur it a little bit. And just make sure it's all completely black. And if I just select this half of the trees, oops, let me undo that. Still got my, set my feather back to 0. Let's select that layer, Command T. I'm just going to bring it up a little bit. Deselect that. Whoops. Reselect. And then just bring this down and back a little. Oops. Hold down Command key to drag a selection around the actual pixels. So that actually wasn't very blurred, so I'm going to blur that out a bit more. Keep blurring that out until it looks sufficiently in the distance. So what we have some trees in the foreground that are nice and sharp and have some highlights, and we have these darker ones that are further back from the road. So let me get the marquee tool again and just bring this selection this side a little bit more. Reselect that and just maybe I'll hide the marching ants. Command H to hide the marching ants so I can see where I'm going. Oops. Okay, well, okay, so now I'm going to need to just delete the lower areas of this tree because they're starting to interfere with the foreground. I think it adds a little something. Could maybe reduce the opacity so it looks like it's further back than it actually is. I could play with that a bit more and make it look a little more lined up and a little less. Obviously you've got this, we have this tree here and this tree here that are almost identical. Maybe I could, let's try flipping it. Flip horizontal. And now we have some different trees. And I would have to mess with the perspective and scaling of those again. So let's see. Let's bring this down a little. And well, I could play with that a little bit more using the individual layers again. It's not perfect. But I definitely think it adds a little dimension to it. And ultimately we've composited a rather nice scenic image from 3 different images. We've downloaded these 3 images from Unsplash. We've got a sunset, we've got the trees, we've got the road that is the perfect perspective road. So I think that concludes the demonstration. Lots of tips and techniques here used, and lots of little sort of keyboard shortcuts. If you missed one or you weren't quite sure what I did, comment in the thread to the video, or obviously any of these channels over here. You can find me and give me a shout, ask me any questions, any suggestions. I look forward to seeing you in another creative briefing, but for now, have a great rest of your day, have a great week, and thanks for watching. Most importantly, be creative. Thanks. Bye bye.